Hello, everybody. Well, here we are. We are beyond Christmas and we're heading for a brand new year, 2021. I sure hope you have some optimism about the new year. You know what? God already knows everything that's going to happen in the coming year. Today, I'd like to talk for a little bit about the crossroads of life. The crossroads of life that we so often find ourselves at. I want to begin by sharing a quote with you from the French poet Jean de La Fontaine. He once said this: "A person often meets his destiny on the road he took to avoid it." Isn't that an interesting thought? A person often meets his destiny on the road he took to avoid it. Well, that would kind of describe the unbelieving and the untrusting Hebrew people of the Old Testament during the time of Moses. You know, after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, the Hebrew people are about to enter into the promised land. They're at a crossroads. But you know what? They were at a similar crossroads 40 years earlier, and they chose not to trust God. But that was under Moses' leadership. They're being led by Joshua now. So I wanted to begin and read for you a little bit from the book of Joshua, chapter 2, starting at verses 1 and 2. This is what it says. "And Joshua, the son of Nun, sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, 'Go and view the land, especially Jericho.' And they went and they came to the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and they lodged there. And it was told to the king of Jericho, 'Behold, men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land.'" You know what? 40 years earlier, the Hebrew people had escaped Egypt. You know that whole Red Sea episode where Moses parts the waters and the Hebrew people cross through on dry ground? Well, after they crossed the Red Sea, Moses had sent 10 spies into the promised land to kind of scope things out, to see what it was like. When those 10 spies came back, 8 of them said that the inhabitants of the land were too powerful to conquer. But there were 2 of those spies who said that we can conquer the Canaanites and the other inhabitants of the land, and we can take possession of the promised land that our God has given us. Those 2 men were Caleb and Joshua. Caleb and Joshua, they recognized the crossroads that the Hebrew people were at 40 years earlier. And they were willing to trust God. Now Joshua, he's about to send his own spies, 2 spies, into the promised land to check things out, especially around the city of Jericho. Now this sounds like a repeat performance. It's something we've heard before that Moses did. But that's when Moses was leading the country. Now Joshua is leading the Hebrew people. The story continues in Hebrews chapter 2, verses 3 through 7, and this is what it says. "Then the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, 'Bring out the men who have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come to search out the land.' The men came to me, but I did not know where they came from. And when the gate was about to close at dark, the men went out, and I do not know where the men went to." Well, do you notice that Rahab is at a crossroads of her own life? The king knows that the spies had gone into her house, and she even acknowledges it. However, Rahab makes a choice. She makes a choice while she's at the crossroads, and her choice is she lies. We're never told in the scriptures that God approved or condoned of Rahab's lies. It was a choice she made while at the crossroads. But you know what? God understands that. In fact, the Apostle Paul understood that God can work within our choices. The Apostle Paul wrote about it in Romans chapter 8, verse 28, when he said this, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purposes." God can take our choices. He can take our decisions. They might even be foolish choices. They might be wrong decisions, or they might even be sinful decisions like Rahab's were, and God can work his purposes even within our decisions, even when we're at a crossroads. Now the story continues in Joshua chapter 2, verses 8 through 10. This is what it says. "Before the men lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, 'I know that the Lord your God has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction.'" Well, do you know the story here? Rahab, they know that the spies have come to her house. The king wants to know where they're at. Rahab says, "Yeah, they were here. I don't know where they came from. I don't know where they went. But when the gates of the city started to close at dark, they left." Well, that wasn't the truth. Rahab had taken those two men, those two spies, up on the roof of her house, and they had she had hidden them. You know what? Rahab here discloses to the two spies that she knows some of the history of the Hebrew people and their relationship with God. She's heard about that Red Sea incident, that one in which Moses parts the Red Sea. She's also heard about how the Hebrew people had conquered those two kings of the Amorites and destroyed them. You know what? You and I have a history with God also. He's been there throughout our lives. He's always been with us at the crossroads of life. Our history, our personal history, tells us that. Our story continues in Joshua chapter 2, verses 11 through 13, and this is what it says. "And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you also will deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death." Well, Rahab is on the precipice of making a decision at the crossroads. She feels like she needs some assurance before she commits, though, before she takes the next step. You know what? Rahab wasn't alone in needing some assurance. Joshua himself needed similar assurance when God chose him to lead the Hebrew people after Moses' death. We see that he needs assurance back in the first chapter. Joshua 1, verse 5, this is what God says: "No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so will I be with you. I will not leave you or forsake you." And isn't that what we all need? To know that God will be with us at the crossroads and beyond the crossroads. Well, this story continues in Joshua 2, verses 14 through 18. This is what it says. "And the men said to her, 'Our life for yours even to death. If you do not tell this business of ours, then when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. Behold, when we come into the land, you shall tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down. And you shall gather into your house your father and mother, your brothers, and all your father's household. You know what? We all need a scarlet cord in our lives. We all need some tangible sign from God that He's there. Some tangible sign that He will be with us when everything is falling down around us. That He will be with us when life changes completely and nothing is as it once was. God has left us with a scarlet cord. It's called the Holy Spirit. Well, the spies tell Rahab she and her family are to stay in their house and they will be safe. Did you know that Rahab's house was built into the wall of Jericho? Did you also know that when the walls of Jericho fell, that part that had Rahab's house in it didn't fall? Well, this story continues in Joshua 2, verse 21. And she said, according to your works, so be it. Then she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. Well, the decision at the crossroads was complete for Rahab. She was going to leave her current life and follow God. She sent the spies away safely. That was a huge step, a huge leap of faith on Rahab's part. You know what? We all stand at a crossroads today. We're about to head into a new year, 2021. The question is this: will we trust God? Will we take the next step of faith and follow God's leading into the new year? Or will we be like the Hebrew people were 40 years earlier when they didn't trust God and they chose to play it safe? Well, they played it safe. They ended up wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, and that entire generation died in the wilderness without ever having seen the promised land. God always has something for us beyond the crossroads. He did for Rahab when Jericho fell. And I want to see what He had ahead for Rahab. This story kind of continues on into chapter 6 of Joshua, verses 22 through 25. This is what it says. But to the two men who had spied out the land, Joshua said, go into the prostitute's house and bring out from there the woman and all who belong to her, as you swore to her. So the young men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and her mother and her brothers and all who belonged to her. And they brought out all her relatives and put them outside of the camp of Israel. Well, we know the story, how the Hebrew people marched around Jericho. On the seventh day, they shouted and the walls fell down. After the walls fell down, Joshua sent the two spies to get Rahab, and the spies kept their promise. Joshua makes sure that Rahab and her family aren't harmed. They aren't Hebrew people, so they're kind of having to camp outside of the Hebrew camp, but Joshua makes a provision for them. Aren't you glad that God keeps His promises? When we are adopted into the family of God, you and I have all the promises of being His children. The Apostle John wrote about it. In John chapter 1, verses 11 and 12, this is what he said. He came to His own, and His own people did not receive Him. But to all who did receive Him, who believed in His name, He gave the right to become children of God. Of course, John is talking about Jesus there. Well, back to our story of Rahab and Jericho. I want to see how it finishes up. Joshua 6, verses 24 through 25. This is what it says. And they burned the city with fire and everything in it. Only the silver and the gold and the vessels of bronze and of iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. But Rahab the prostitute and her father's household and all who belonged to her, Joshua saved alive. And she has lived with Israel to this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Well, Rahab meets God at the crossroads of her life, and she became one of his children. God met Rahab at the crossroads of her life and had something planned for her beyond the crossroads, just like he does for me and you. Rahab, the plan was, she became the great, great, great grandmother of King David, from whose lineage Jesus would come. What does God have for you? What does God have for me beyond the crossroads of 2020 into 2021 and the new year? I hope you will trust him and follow him. Well, until the next time, God bless all of you.